Hi everybody, welcome to CAMIBAart Gallery, and thanks for joining us for the Artist Talk with Jen Rose and her exhibit Since Last We Met. And this is going to be on view through May 15th. And today we're doing something new. Since we started recording the videos during the pandemic, this is the first time we're actually going to have a live audience. So we've got a small group of people in the gallery, fully masked, but they're here to enjoy the talk with us. So if you hear any noises or hear any questions, that's where they're coming from. So this is Jen Rose.
Hi.
And Jen, thanks for being here, and I'm looking forward to you sharing your thoughts with us. And I just want to start off with, maybe you can give us a little bit about your background.
Sure, yeah. So my name's Jen Rose. I live in Dallas, Texas, and I received my Master's of Fine Arts in Ceramics from UNT about 2002. And for the past 10 years or so, 7 to 10 years, I've been working exclusively in porcelain installation and porcelain sculpture. So I'm very inspired by the natural world, by ecology. I'm constantly thinking about, issues with our planet and things that we coexist with. And so I'm working on adding those things into my work.
Okay.
Yeah.
And multiples is a big part of your work as well, working with multiple of this sort of similar shape.
Mm-hmm.
And why? Is there a reason?
So I find doing the same thing over and over very meditative. And for me, it really helps calm my mind. So this started back in 2015. After my father died, I spent one solid year making 1,000 octopus tentacles. And that was kind of a commitment I made to spend a year in the studio and just do the same thing over and over and over and process my thoughts and my grief and, just anything that came to mind. And then I exhibited all of those together as one piece. So that's when I really started doing the multiples, and I enjoyed the time I spent with them. So I continued that on. And it's been constantly trying to find a way to exhibit the multiples in some sort of structure. So they've become kind of assembled together either on a wooden surface or on some sort of surface. And now I've moved into the fabric surface.
Fabric surface, yeah. And that came about because you found a loom, right?
I did. The stars aligned last pandemic, and I found a loom on the street that was just in bulky trash. And so there was this house that was being renovated, and I think they pulled this loom out of the crawl space. And so I was walking by, and I found it, and I took a weaving class back in college, 20 years ago. And I loved it, but I hadn't done it since then. So I found the loom, I called the maker of the loom, and it's a table loom, so it's not enormous. Mm-hmm. And I ordered a missing part, and then I got a textbook that was also made in the 70s. and vintage textbook, and I taught myself how to weave again. And so then I started weaving all kinds of washcloths and stuff, and that was kind of my first inclination. I was like, oh, well, this is a fun experiment. Uh-huh. And then I actually went through the textbook and started looking at the alternative processes and rug making techniques, and realized there was a looping system that I could add my ceramic pieces to. And so that's when the two kind of clicked.
So it wasn't right away. It's not like you saw the loom and went, oh, I'm gonna weave in porcelain.
No.
It was just like, I'm gonna start weaving and play with this thing.
No, it was like, I can make dishcloths.
Yeah.
That's something else I can do.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah.
And so when you decided, oh look, I can weave in porcelain pieces, what was your first thought? Did you know where you were going with it, or you just started playing around?
No, I just wanted to see if it would work. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I was pretty sure it would work, but I just kind of wanted to do some stuff. And so the first one I did is actually a piece that I had a bunch of extra pieces in the studio laying around. So that was a pretty easy one to start with because I had all the parts. And I just assembled them together. You know, I had to do some research on what type of, I use linen thread because that's the strongest thread I could think of, and some, did a little bit of research on that end. but I really didn't know where I was going with it. And I just thought, I felt like this had a lot of potential, but I wasn't sure what direction it would go in. Mm-hmm.
And where did the forms, the different porcelain forms, come from? Is that something you were already creating, or is it something you started creating because of the weaving?
Well, a little bit of both. So there are some forms that are like needles.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at this piece right here, it's got these needle forms on the inside and on the top here. And I was making some stuff like that already. But then I also had made these tube forms on a larger scale that we put in trees. And so you have one of those outside right now. And so I just began to alter them to create a size that worked with the piece that I was making, or the loom size, so that I could use those all together. But like I would spend time in the shower thinking, I could use water bottles and make rafts. Like I was just like going all over the place with this until I narrowed down exactly what I wanted to do. Yeah.
And I'm going to jump back just a little bit. Why did you start working with porcelain in the first place? How did that happen?
I started making all of those octopus tentacles with porcelain, and I really fell in love with the whiteness of it. It has a quietness to it that I really enjoy. And it's funny because nothing in here is white, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've colored everything, but I've also realized that porcelain will accept the color of whatever I put into it. So one thing that I always really disliked about ceramics was the glaze.
Mm-hmm.
I love making new glazes. I really geek out on that chemistry that's involved in all of that. But, that is something that it limits you because you can only fire on one side of the piece.
Mm-hmm.
Because it'll stick to the kiln. So what I began to do is just adding the colorants to the porcelain, and it's super vibrant, very bright, and then that allows me to work with color without the limitations of the glaze.
Mm-hmm. So is that joy piece an example of where you've added the color?
It is, yes.
So these are colored all the way through?
So they're colored all the way through. So if one of these broke, it would still be colored where it's broken.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And as opposed to like this guy is white all the way through, and it's got, it's cobalt?
Well, yeah. So this is where my chemistry nerdiness kicks in. So I dip this in a cobalt salt, and the salt, it's cobalt sulfate, and so the salt is water soluble and will absorb into the clay body. So again, it's not a glaze because it doesn't have a glass maker in it that makes it stick to the kiln. But if you broke this, it would still have some sort of blue all the way through. So it's like putting cranberry juice on a paper towel. Like it just sucks it up. Mm-hmm.
And you probably said this, but you do the glaze, you do the cobalt before you fire it or after?
I fire it to bisque fire, so it's kind of halfway baked or halfway done, and then it's very absorbent at that stage. So then I add the cobalt, and then I fire it to the high temperature.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. But so if you hadn't done that, these would be white all the way through.
Exactly.
So this is just sort of the natural white porcelain.
It is.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And where do your color choices come from? What is that?
So I really enjoy things that come from the sea and come from nature. And so these things, like the blue on the ends of these, I'm thinking of things that grow in deep sea hydrothermic vents. And they have all kinds of weird creatures. And one of them that I've been fascinated by for a long time is, I think they're called sea tubes or sea worms. Mm-hmm. And so they're really tall. And they're all white, and they're kind of textured on the base, and then they've got this bright red tip on the end, and then a thing that comes out, and I think it eats things, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, right. So that's where this came from. But this is really, the sulfate really only comes in blue and maybe green. So there aren't a lot of options for this right now. So I knew that I could get the blue, and I really enjoy the blue. It's very striking, and it also references the sea. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing I was thinking about. Yeah.
And so you do think about like real life animals or creatures or whatever when you're creating these guys.
Exactly, I do. And I was really inspired a few years ago. I went to Alaska and I spent some time in a tide pool, just kind of with some friends, just by myself, and found all kinds of strange organisms. And so that's what inspired this. And in fact, I have just booked a trip back to Alaska to do more formal research with a naturalist so that I can, examine these animals more closely.
That is so exciting.
Mm-hmm.
That's really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
And the color for the threads or the weaving element, is that
It's, this was kind of a happy accident because it started off, I was just looking for nylon thread because I thought it would be a really strong material to weave with. But I started looking at mason line. I guess they use it in I don't know how they use it, but anyway, I'm not, I don't do that. So, but it comes in all these cool colors. So I started using that and really enjoying the voice that it gave to the piece. Before I was using linen, which has a very soft voice. So like this green piece over here, this is all linen thread, and it has a feel to it that I enjoy, and I think it's really beautiful. But the nylon thread gives it a stronger, more vibrant voice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's sort of like a spinal cord that runs through the entire creature.
Mm-hmm. Can you manipulate some of these for us?
I can, yeah.
I want people to see. And I know that there's a difference because we haven't talked yet about the sort of what you've done with the loom. So you started with just working on the loom and weaving things together. Maybe we can see one of those first and then talk about what came next.
Can we talk about hunger?
Yeah, let's talk about hunger. That's great.
Okay. So, so this piece I like to call, well, it's called Hunger, and it was woven directly on the loom. And the nice thing about weaving on the loom is all of these are dynamic. So they can move and they have, when it's woven on the loom, it has one part that is the fabric, and then it has the other part that has all the pieces attached to it. So it was actually set up this way on the loom, right? And then all of that was underneath. But you see how it likes to move around, and it also because of the fabric, it's loosening up a little bit as it gets moved more and more. So it becomes a little more flexible in how it moves, and that changes depending on how much it's handled and what materials I use to make it as well. But I realized after doing this one that I could take the warp off the loom. So all the threads, I could take those off and I could put them vertically. So I instead of putting them on a loom, I figured out a way to suspend them from the ceiling and hang down. And then I was able to weave on both sides. So for example, if we go back to this piece named Joy over here, this piece was woven in this orientation. So it was hanging, and I was able to put a row of porcelain pieces on one side and then go around and put a row on the other side. So now this is in the round, and it does not have that soft underbelly. So the only place that you can see the thread is at the top and at the bottom, right? So, and this piece that's called Disruption is built the same way. So here I've changed, instead of just changing the colors, I've changed the kinds of things that are attached. So all the needles are on one side. And in fact, I made a point to skip some areas in here so that it could move a little bit. It would hunch over a little bit more. So starting to play with that.
I really love this guy. He's got so many different shapes, or he's got these little round-ish pieces.
The beads,
and he's got these you called them scars the other day. These little scars back in there that are.
It's like I'm starting to build stories with these as I'm making them. And so this creature was in a fight, and his little scar tissue is on the back right here. So those little things, you recognize that it's had a life, and so it's got all of the scars that go with that life.
That is super cool.
Yeah.
And so when you're weaving on just one side or you're weaving on both sides, does it change the type of attachment you're using, or is it the same attachment?
It's the exact same attachment on both sides. So the only difference is that it's in the round.
It's in the round. So you're just kind of working all the way around that as you go up. Or do you go up or down?
I go up. So it's all threads, and in the first stages, like it's actually attached. It's called a back strap loom. So it's attached around my back to get tension. So I weave like that just to get the weaving started, and then I'll put it down and then hang weights from it. And so once the piece becomes heavy enough, it becomes its own weight. But it goes through a few different stages in the process. But a backstrap loom is a really primitive loom, and so it's actually the first thing that the first looms people ever made.
Yeah, I'm familiar with those, with a lot of the weaving we see in Latin America.
Sure.
On the tours.
Yeah.
It's super cool. Talk to me about this piece over here, because it's got a lot of different fun elements.
Yeah, so this piece is called Allure. And one thing that is I don't know, it's a little bit interesting, is that my family always, from the time I was a little kid, would go fishing. And that was one of the activities my dad used to take me on quite a bit, just locally. But we would always also go to the Texas coast and fish. And I started getting really interested in the lures that they would use to catch things. I mean, they're like sparkly and shiny, and you're like, fish, they don't seem like fish would like these, but they do. So I started playing around with attaching some of this in nylon cord and shredding it and using that as attachments in addition to the porcelain.
And I also really like on this one how you've looped the cord over here. It's frayed over there and looped here, which gives it a different feel to it also, that it's just like this, almost like the roots of the piece or something that are coming out at the bottom.
Well, and I'm thinking also about, some sea creatures like flounder, they have this little ruffle that like goes along the sea floor, so I'm kind of thinking about that as I make
almost like he's floating off.
Exactly, yeah.
Is there a tie to this whole body of work and this body of work? Do you see a relationship between them?
I do. So this was created initially as a much larger piece back in 2018. And it's funny, excuse me, everything in here is based off of the sea for the most part. But this is based off of birds and flight. And so it still goes back to the natural world. So I call these pieces murmurations. So it's a reference of starlings in flight avoiding a predator. And it also creates a sense of movement. So what's nice is that these will move a little bit depending on airflow. And they'll also make a little bit of noise. So that references back to these pieces as well, and the noise that these make. Yeah, exactly, as you move those. But it is still based on the natural world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's also interesting. They're not woven, but there's this attachment element to them, right? Where they're threaded in a way, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm using stainless steel wire for this, which I like the way the light shines off of that. But it's still like, this is kind of a more contained version of this. So this is, is more free moving, it has the potential to be very dynamic. And this does too, but it's all more contained and tight.
And you have to move these as opposed to these could move on their own if there's wind or air movement in the space or whatever. Yeah. And
I also like the shadows behind this because that references the birds as well.
Yeah, and that's my thing. everybody knows, it's been to my gallery, shadows are my thing. So
Mhm.
this, absolutely in love with the shadows. Matter of fact, I've tried to do that with a lot of these pieces as we light them, is try to get fun shadows underneath them, the way they're sitting, so you can appreciate that as well. And as you change it, it would really change the shadowing.
Definitely.
It's a lot of fun. Well, I want to open it up to a few questions from the audience. If anybody have any questions they want to ask Jen?
Sort of curious how you put a loop or something on the end of the porcelain piece so that you can bind it to.
So, yeah, I've gone through several different solutions with that, and my favorite one is to use a piece of wire that won't melt in the kiln, and so it's a nichrome coated wire, and you just put that into the piece when I'm making it, and then fire it, and it's ready to go afterwards. And so that works really well, and it creates a loop at the end. Otherwise, I might use the same stainless steel wire and epoxy that in to create, and that's how I created some of these pieces, like Joy. Yeah, but yeah, the porcelain isn't strong enough by itself just to have a hole that would be pierced into it and then manipulated. Like, you really need something that's somewhat flexible, but also will like be strong enough to have that attachment and not break.
Anybody else?
I was curious about the patterns that are on some of them, like how you decide how you make those.
It's just a lot of fun. I don't have another much other explanation than that, but I've developed a way to roll these to create the patterns that are on them, and I just really enjoy doing that, and it makes the whole process a little bit more fun and also visually interesting. So I've included that in there. Yeah.
And how are you doing it? Are you just pressing into them with some patterning?
No, I extrude the tubes. The tubes are all extruded, and then I'll put a dowel through the tube and then roll it onto something. So that creates the texture. Yeah, I found that cake decorating shops have great textures to play with. So there's all kinds of things that I use, from like some of these crimps are from the jewelry world, some are from the fishing world, some are from the cake decorating world like this. So there's a lot of different things that come together. Wow. Yes?
Hey Jen, you mentioned that there are a couple of locations that have inspired you, Alaska and the Texas coast. Are there other physical places that have inspired some of these works?
I'm trying to think. When I was a kid, my granddad had a place that was on a hill in the hill country. It was in Goldthwaite, Texas, actually, and so it overlooked the entire town. And my cousins and I would go down to the bottom of the hill and pick up fossils. There were entire sea anemones that were fossilized. And that was my first introduction to fossils. And as a kid, I just thought, you can find these anywhere, right? Like,
They're everywhere.
They're everywhere. But yeah, so that was a really interesting thing for me to do as a kid, and just have free reign. Like, no one was watching us. We just ran around. Other things that have inspired me are just really my backyard. I mean, looking at I have birds in the backyard, and I try and promote things like bees and pollinators are really interesting to me. I have another series I do with that. And so those, just anything in the natural world is pretty amazing. And any kind of coastline, I find fascinating.
I was wondering if you could talk about this one, because I just love how you have the color on the inside and the outside. How did you do that?
How did I do that? So this one is actually, going back to birds, it's based off of the red-winged blackbird. And I don't know if you've seen those, but they're blackbirds, and they've got these little bands, like they've all been in the army, right? Like they're like red and yellow right here. So I have, these are molded, and so I have, I made all of these little pieces out of wet clay, took a mold of them, and then poured different layers of colored slip in. And so through that process, I'm able to get the white, the back with the white line and then the pink inside. And I teach, and so I teach at Dallas College and ceramics, and I always tell my students the edge is the most important piece or part of the object. Like the edge creates the line, the edge is what people see first. And so I feel like this piece and these edges really make me true to that statement.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think for me, that's the most beautiful part about this is just this, the tricolors that you get there. Also reminds me of that ice cream with Napoleon.
Oh, neat.
I was like, what is that?
Yeah.
I was like, it's ice cream.
Ice cream. Yeah, definitely.
That's just me. Maybe I'm hungry. Other questions? I wanted to talk about this piece right here. The weaving on this guy is really special. What was it?
Would you like to see it?
Yes, will you show us? And also just talk about it, because it's all the rest of these seem to have one color thread or weaving, and this one really, you went to town on the weaving.
I did. So, so this is a linen warp, and then a cotton weft that goes across it. And so the black is all cotton, and you get these stripes in here because of the black weft that goes left and right across the loom. And then the other thing that's interesting with these pieces is that I realized as I was making these, the connection was very obvious. So inside here, I could see, where all of these pieces connected to the linen, and I wasn't super thrilled about that. So I started doing a different kind of rug making technique, which is a shag rug, where you knot in parts or cut threads with it. So that's what has created all of this fluff right here.
Love all that.
Yeah.
And then what made you decide to wear it?
I could. So I created this in response to 2020 and to the COVID pandemic. It's the only piece in the show where I really neutralize the colors, so it's just value. And it seemed a little bit darker and a little bit drab to me. And then I realized that, I could do performance pieces with these and I could wear them. And so I was telling John that, like, my daughter came out and I was like just in my bra and I had this on my head and a ring light in front of me, and she was like,
Mom.
Yeah, but that's where this image came from, and it's it's just, I think this embodies like the exhaustion of 2020 and of the COVID pandemic and everything that goes along with it.
Well, you had one that you made at the end of the year last year, as well, that was called Bird in 2020. I'm going to pull that image out real quick.
Yeah.
So the piece is sold, but you just brought this in today, and so you had an image of you wearing that piece,
Right.
and you've printed it on aluminum. And I just think these are so fun. It's just like, it's a fun, I would be neat to do a performance with these.
I think so
sort of
too.
Performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, who knows what's next? I'm thinking about different sizes of these and wearing them and doing different things with them. But this piece is called 2020 Vision.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and you had, like, I think there was a photo that we actually sold with it that had,
And it wasn't me, that was a model.
It was a model
that was
carrying
holding
it.
Yeah, carrying
it like a burden.
Exactly.
Yeah. Super neat. And then these can be outside.
Yes, these pieces can be outside. So they're made with the idea that possibly tube-dwelling beneficial insects could live inside of them, and then they could come back out in the spring and pollinate your plants, and they're really good for the earth. So that's one of the things, it's like this little nesting idea with these as well.
And is that where loft comes from? Also, the loft pieces, are those for insects to dwell in, or is
when I first put those together, I was thinking about insects, but they actually need an end piece and they have to be a certain size. So this is more of the correct size. What's really interesting about these is that if they're too short, you only get male insects, which then don't really do anything for the environment. Sorry, guys. But if they're long enough, then it'll do, like the females are put in at the back because they take longer to develop. So the longer the tube, the more female insects you'll get because the males are all up front. Yeah. So anyway, but I did find out that they need a closed backing for them. And I was trying to think of a replacement from, you've probably seen like those solitary bee homes that have like the bamboo sticks that are all packaged together. Those are not always beneficial because they grow parasites and they have some like fungus that can damage the bees and the insects. So this one could be sterilized in the fact that you could just put this in an oven at 200 degrees. And then heat it back up. Like it's really, really sturdy. So that's not going to hurt any of the elements that are in it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, one more question. Anybody? No? All right. I think we covered almost everything. Anything else you wanted to cover that I didn't talk about?
No, I think that's it. That was great.
Awesome. Well, thanks for doing this with us and for the show. And thanks everybody for watching. If you will make sure and see the show if it's not over yet. It's May 15th is the last day, and you can book an appointment online using our online calendar. And we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Thank you guys.
Thank you.